Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, the podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you've followed this podcast for long enough, you'll know I'm obsessed with my sleep. Good sleep is incredibly essential for not only our physical recovery, but also mental acuity, creativity, well-being, and longevity. It affects everything we do. One change I've made in my life that has dramatically improved my sleep is blocking blue light in the evening with blue blocking glasses by Blue Blocks. Exposing ourselves to unnatural blue light from not just screens and devices, but also lamps and lights in our homes or outside stops our body from making melatonin and prevents us from getting deep restorative sleep. Blue Blocks lenses are the only ones to be lab tested to block 100% of both blue and green spectrum light. They're actually very stylish. I've had several compliments on the Kent pair I own, and my wife loves the Stellas. They're incredibly high quality, and they donate a pair of reading glasses through Restoring Vision to those in need for every pair sold. Get yours today with code CARNIVORE15, all uppercase, no spaces, at BLUBLOX.com to look great, get better sleep, and support the show. Thanks. Nsima Inyang at the Natty Professor is a former at okay. I'll redo that. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know why I messed that up. I obviously follow you on Instagram. I message you on Instagram. Yeah. Nsima Inyang, the Natty Professor at Nsima Inyang on Instagram, is a former competitive natural bodybuilder, competitive powerlifter, co-host of Mark Bell's Power Project, along with Mark Bell and Andrew Zaragoza, host of the Smooth Panther YouTube channel, which my wife and I love, and all-around jacked, friendly, and awesome guy. One of the reasons I'm especially excited to have you on, Nsima, is because you're performing arguably the most glycolytic sports, not only Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but lifting as well, at the highest level with few carbohydrates after coming from this world of conventional bodybuilding, evidence-based lifting, where carbs are often 400 to 500 a day, with 5 to 6 meals a day. And I think you're a shining example for people, my audience, of what they can do with very little carbs and fasting. So really grateful to have you on today.
Yeah, Scott, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So maybe we can just start with, for folks who aren't familiar with your story, and I know we won't go as deep as you've gone on the Power Project. I'd encourage folks to check out, I think it's episode like 39 or one of the early ones where you go really deep into your history, which I love. But where did you get started in health and fitness? And has it always been a passion of yours? Did you play a lot of sports growing up? How did that come about?
Yeah. So oddly enough, my main sport growing up was soccer. Started that at 6, stopped playing around 21. I played that in college too. But I started lifting when I was 13 years old. That's when my whole lifting career started because I got injured doing soccer. I had this thing called Osgood-Schlatter, which is kind of like so you're growing too fast for the ligaments and tendons in your knees to catch up to you. So I had a lot of pain in my knees. Walking was painful. Running was impossible. So that's when I started lifting. And I lifted for 3 years. I was off soccer for 3 years. So I focused on lifting for like 3 years, from 13 to 16. I ended up being a very large 16-year-old. But at that point, I started soccer again, dropped some weight, kept the lifting included. And when I got injured in college, when I was like 20, 21, that's when I started focusing only on lifting and got into bodybuilding at that point. So, I mean, I was lifting that whole time, but I was doing soccer and lifting. After that, I got into natural bodybuilding when I was 21, did a lot of shows, got into powerlifting after I did Worlds. When I was 23 or 24, I went to WNBF Worlds as a natural bodybuilder. I got 5th in the world in terms of the heavyweights.
Wow.
And then when I started doing powerlifting, I kind of shifted my focus to powerlifting and did some of that. And then after I competed in powerlifting, I started wanting to do some jiu-jitsu just because I felt like I wasn't doing enough cardio. I wasn't, soccer's a sport where you run around all the time. So I wanted to find something that would allow me to expend myself. Started jiu-jitsu, fell in love with that. And now that's my athletic focus, although I still do a lot of lifting. I still maintain strength. Yeah, that's the quickest rundown I can manage.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. You answered like my first 5 questions right there. So that's super helpful. And how did you get introduced to Mark and the gym / the podcast?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was watching or I've seen the Super Training YouTube channel since I was like a teenager, but I met Mark, I think, for the first time at the LA Fit Expo in 2015. Yeah, I think 2015. I saw him at Barbell Brigade, and he actually recognized me because I think like I came down to a podcast that he had like in the gym live with a few people. So he recognized me from that. He's like, "You live in Sacramento, right?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh, you should come train at Super Training." I was like, "Oh shit, cool." So then
I'm trying to play it off like it's no big deal.
yeah, but I was all giddy on the inside and shit, you know? So then, the next week I started training at Super Training, and it's just everything started going from there.
Yeah, that's
So,
cool.
It's a while.
And what along your evolution of, soccer athlete to bodybuilder, powerlifter, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and now today, how did your nutrition evolve during those phases? Like if it fits your macros, carbs, how did that evolution take place alongside your shift in sport and physique focus?
Mm-hmm. So, when I was playing soccer, I was eating a lot of carbohydrates just because, that's something that my coaches told me that I needed to do. I felt that I needed to do. When I started focusing on bodybuilding, I worked with Alberto Nunez for a while, and I learned all about like tracking and IFYM, etc. And, there was an era, especially at around that time, 2013, 2014, 2015, when IFYM was getting really popular on social media. There was a big push to see how much you can push your carbs without really like gaining a lot of weight, getting a lot of body fat. Also, adding in fun foods, etc., processed foods. So there was a point that my carbs were at like 600, 700 grams, and I was maintaining a decent body weight. I had a lot of expenditure still. I was doing quite a bit of cardio, but the whole point of doing that at that time, right, of having your carbs so high, isn't just to have them very high. The point of doing it is so that when you start a bodybuilding prep, you have a larger amount of calories to work with until you get to your desired body weight, right? So if you start pushing your deficit, instead of ending your cut at, 50 grams of carbs and 40 grams of fat and 200 grams of protein, you could potentially end at 250 grams of carbs, 50 grams of fat, and 200 grams of protein, right? That was the whole point. So it was cool and all, but at the end of the day, I was not feeling good eating that much every single day. I just wasn't feeling good. I was performing all right, but I felt kind of just disgusting. Just didn't feel good, right? Moving into powerlifting, the nutrition, I still ate a good amount of carbs, but it wasn't as much as when I was focused on bodybuilding. So I think the carbs probably moved around down to an average of 300 to 400, 450. And then a little bit into that's when I started trying to toy around with just eating less carbs overall to see, well, am I going to lose body weight, and eating much higher fat. The protein's been high for my whole history. I've always eaten a lot of protein. And I noticed that there wasn't really much of a change in my energy levels. I was performing well. It seemed to be that there was kind of a cutoff point for what I needed. I could get away eating 150 grams of carbs and still perform really, really well. And eating much more than that would not add anything, would not give me any type of boost in my performance. So even when I started doing jiu-jitsu and then I started introducing fasting into the whole mix and training fasted, I wasn't seeing a big dip in my performance, and I didn't need to eat excessive amounts of carbs to be able to perform. So I don't know if that's a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah, did I answer your question there?
Yeah, and I guess kind of building on that, you kind of answered this, but I guess what I'm wondering is both as an athlete and as a coach, you coach a lot of people who are probably into similar sports and endeavors, bodybuilding, etc., into physique. How do you reconcile your past experience with having lots of carbs, seeing really successful bodybuilders like Alberto Nunez, the 3DMJ crew, Mike Israetel, even, in Renaissance periodization, he's doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at a high level and lifting, bodybuilding. How do you reconcile that with your own experience? And maybe has it been similar for your clients, seeing that, maybe they can do well with fewer carbs, with a, more moderate amount, or maybe it varies?
I try not to get stuck in the dogma, really. And I think a few years ago, because like those are guys that I pay attention to, 3MJ, Lane, Mike Israel, a lot of those guys with that same type of, it's a lot of the same information, but seeing what I was able to do with myself, how I was able to perform, how I felt on a day-to-day basis, how easy it was for me to maintain a very, very lean physique without really tracking or trying. I was just, I just decided I'm going to just try this with a few people who are willing to give this a shot, who are willing to, see how they feel. And what I found is bodybuilders, because I've worked with quite a few bodybuilders who I've had use some fasting during their prep, they reported much less need to binge because when they were able to actually eat post their fasting window, whether it's 16, 18, whatever hours, they were able to eat a nice bolus amount of food, a nice large multiple meals, which kept them full into the next day. Their performance didn't dip too much if they were able to have some carbohydrates around their workouts, and they felt great. It's like a lot of them reported that their prep didn't feel like a prep where you're always thinking about food all the time. So that's where I think there's some merit in using some fasting for bodybuilders. And there's some merit in using fasting outside of it too. But along with that, a lot of those athletes that I worked with, we did just mess around with keeping the carbs just not super low, not like 100 grams or whatever, but lower than normal, and having much higher fats, especially for men, just because I found that, especially in natural bodybuilding, it's really normal for individuals to bring their fats really low. But when men bring their fats really low, not only do you have the added, let's say, negative of being so lean that your hormones are affected, but eating 30 to 35, 40 grams of fat a day as a man, being super lean, that's where you get to the point where like you don't have a sex drive. Your libido is absolutely tanked. You can't think of anything else but food. You're always angry. Your mood's just trash, right? So instead, I wanted to keep the fats at, let's just say for in general, maybe a minimum of 80 or 70 or 80 for these athletes. Have the carbs, wherever they are, wherever they can handle while they're still dropping, and see what we see in terms of how they feel. And most of them did not feel that same type of tank in their hormonal levels. At a certain point, you'll just feel it. Like, me straight up, I don't know what I can say on this podcast, but you're
say whatever you want.
It literally, things don't work when you get to 5% body fat and you're eating no fats. But I found that if I could have them at slightly, more lower carbohydrates, but higher fats for bodybuilding, the athletes just generally felt better. And yeah, like I don't try to have all the athletes that I work with to do the same thing that I do. There's some athletes I work with that, they just eat a lot of carbs and that's okay with them. But I typically don't suggest that even if an athlete is able to get away with eating 600 grams of carbs a day, I don't really have them push it like that anymore, just because I think that's kind of unnecessary. That's an unnecessary amount of energy that you're kind of doing almost nothing with. Yeah. It just doesn't, it's not that beneficial.
Yeah. Unless you're in the Tour de France or something like that, like no one is burning that much.
Well, yeah, you're just lifting. Like, and yeah, it's very glycolytic, but that's at the end of the day, you're just lifting for an hour and a half.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you talked about fasting. When did fasting enter the picture for you? You have great YouTube videos on this. I know they're a couple of years old now, but the content's evergreen. But if you could just explain for folks where fasting entered the picture and why.
Gosh, I'm trying to figure out like why I even started doing it, because I don't remember the whole reason why I started picking it up. But I think I started like using some fasting 3 years ago. I think I actually started doing it just to be able to help myself focus more during the day. It wasn't really for a body fat or body composition type of benefit. It was just like, I hear that some people say that they're able to focus a little bit more without having, to think about food or whatever. So I was like, okay, I'll try that. And I did notice that I was able to keep my mind on the things I needed to do during the day much easier. But then I also noticed that when I was doing jiu-jitsu, fasted, for some reason, I just felt more focused. It didn't feel as hard as I thought it would. I thought that, all that time, especially coming from a soccer background where you always eat like 2 hours before practice, make sure you have a heavy carb meal so you can perform. I was assuming that I'm going to cramp up, I'm going to feel crappy, I'm not going to be able to perform. I performed really, really well. And when I started like dropping weight, right? I was dropping body fat without really even trying, partially because my calories were a little bit lower, but at the same time, I didn't even feel like I was dieting, just because when I was able to eat, again, I was able to eat a good amount of satisfying food. Like I felt full, rather than breaking my food into, 3 small meals during the day, eating in the morning, and then immediately feeling hungry for the rest of the day. That dieting felt easy. I didn't even feel like I was dieting, and I still don't feel like I'm dieting right now, maintaining, the body fat that I have. But then, yeah, I just started to notice, like, when I got down to around 245, 250, which is where I am now, I've been the same weight for about 2 years now. I would have never thought that I'd be able to maintain this without having to track every single day, having to be very, very strict with my food and my macros and all of that, and doing like a crazy amount of like tracking my cardio. I never thought I'd be able to do it without even thinking. But at this point, this is just my new body fat set point without feeling like I'm on a diet.
Yeah. And so do you think the fasting and not tracking kind of go hand in hand, and the fasting enabled you to stop tracking?
Yeah, because when an individual starts fasting, if they're irresponsible like myself, what'll happen is when you go on your first few fasts, when you have your eating window, you'll eat a crazy amount of food, right? You'll then notice that, for me, I think the second day I ate so much that I was like, ugh, I felt nauseous and I threw up. Very, very stupid move. Not smart. Don't fill up an empty stomach with food when you after you're fasting. Okay, that's just not a good move. You heard it here. But if you do eat responsibly, within that period, it's going to be very, very difficult typically for you to, eat in a surplus after fasting for 20 hours. If you have a 4-hour window or even a 6-hour window, you can eat a good amount of food and still be in a deficit fairly easily without feeling like you need to stuff your face even more. So that's one of the big reasons. It's like, there are other benefits to fasting, but in essence, it allows you to maintain a caloric deficit with ease if you're just able to get through the first part of the day of fasting, which is what some people have a problem with. But after you do it for a while, it becomes such an easy process, just becomes a part of daily life.
This episode is brought to you by Optimal Carnivore. Optimal Carnivore was created by carnivores for carnivores. They've recently released a new product, a grass-fed bone marrow. It is the whole bone extract, which includes the bone marrow, the cartilage, and collagen peptides. Our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal, including bones, and especially the marrow. All the nutrients and substances that your body needs to build, repair, and maintain your bones, teeth, and connective tissue can come from the bone marrow. It's a complex that contains the same components as home-cooked bone broth, but making bone broth can be a hassle. You have to source high-quality bones, boil them for days, and this is a simple, convenient alternative that's gently freeze-dried so it preserves all the nutrients completely intact. It's perfect for people who are traveling or don't have time to make bone broth themselves. Visit www.amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code carnivore10 to receive 10% off your purchase. Do you think like not tracking macros is probably what's right for most people? Not like competition level bodybuilders, but people with body composition goals. And how, like, it sounds like starting fasting is one piece, but how would you suggest people transition away from tracking macros if they've done it for a long time?
Yeah. So that's a really individual thing. I come from a background of tracking macros every single day. So when I started not tracking macros, I was still able to intuitively look at meals and see what I was eating. And in my head, kind of be like, I've had this much today, I'm good. Or, I really haven't had that much today, I definitely need to eat more protein, etc. And the only reason I was able to do that was because I had a background of tracking macros. I wasn't only doing that when I was in a deficit, trying to cut for a bodybuilding show or trying to get lean. I was also doing that in a surplus, trying to push my body weight slowly into very high numbers without putting on a lot of body fat, right? So I do think, though, to answer your main question, is that a place where people outside of like competition bodybuilders who are cutting or even bulking, was that where people should be, not tracking? Yes, I do think that that's one of the big goals. Every individual is different, though. There's some people who just like tracking and like that it doesn't stress them out. But I do think the end goal is to be able to just go through life, eat the foods that you want to eat, ideally healthy foods, right? But not have to plot a scale or have to track everything all the time. I think that's at a certain point you should be able to do it. But this is where Mark and I kind of came to the same place, but we took different routes. I came to this place by, coming from a place of tracking to fasting and then not tracking to be able to maintain whatever goals I have. Mark never really tracked. He just, he ate super clean. He started using some fasting, and then he kind of just like goes by the size of the meals that he eats each day and still ends up at the same place. So it's not like you had to have tracked, but I do think if you can handle it, whatever your goal may be, it is a good idea to track for a while, a little bit, just so you kind of understand, okay, well, if I eat this much steak, it's that much protein, or this much chicken, or this much rice, just for the general foods that you're going to be eating, so that you could, because it gets to a point where you can eyeball a random meal and have a pretty good ballpark of how many calories is in that meal because you've tracked stuff before. And it's a really good skill to have.
Yeah. And just general education, like a couple cuts of nuts is like 1,500 calories. Like most people don't know that.
Yep. That's why I stay away from them.
Yeah. That's great. And do you think, and with your clients, is it possible to build muscle with lots of fasting or 1 to 2 meals a day?
It is. But the thing is, there comes a difficulty when you're trying to build, let's say, a lot of muscle, right? If you're having 1 meal a day, can you pack in 200 grams of protein and your carbs and your fats in that 1 meal? Is that the best way that you're going to want to do it? Probably not. I do think it is a good idea to maybe just not eat for part of the day, maybe do a 12-hour, and then have your food in the latter part of the day and still get in all your meals. But doing like a 20-hour fast or something, trying to do a lean type bulk, I don't think that's super productive. Possible, yes. And if you want to do that, you definitely can. You're just going to be having very large meals and you might feel a little bit uncomfortable.
But it's more around the volume and not around like you need this many muscle protein synthesis spikes throughout the day or whatever.
Yeah. See, so therein lies something. I'm really happy you brought that up because research does say that having even protein feedings during the day does increase muscle protein synthesis. But when I hear that and I look at that, I'm really just thinking, well, when an individual's weighing this option, if you're someone who would much rather just eat 2 meals a day, is that small increase in muscle protein synthesis from eating maybe 2 more even meals during the day, is that really going to make or break your progress when it comes to looking at the macro goal? And when I say macro, I just mean the larger goal. Like a year from now, did you sacrifice 10 pounds of muscle? No, probably not. Maybe you sacrificed a half a pound or something so negligible that it really doesn't make a big difference. Now, if you are a bodybuilder who's trying to eke out every ounce of muscle that you possibly can through a large spectrum of time, then have your small protein feedings, eat as much carbohydrates as you need to eat. Do everything you possibly can to get all of that muscle growth that for most people who are trying to build muscle, it really won't mean much. Do what you got to do there. But for most people, I'd more so say that enjoyment of their lifestyle while being able to move towards their goals is a more important thing and a more important factor than eking out every little small ounce of muscle that they can along the way.
Yeah, adherence and consistency beat perfection every time. I also think a lot of those studies are done on people who are used to eating like 10 times a day. And I think the body adjusts. Like if you've been eating 2 meals a day for years, your body gets really efficient. The body is smart, right? It gets really efficient at using protein in the appropriate style and absorbing it slower and spacing it out for you, so that you can get that elevated muscle protein synthesis for longer versus someone who's, used to eating every 2 hours and they do the study with whey protein shakes, which digest super quickly. It's totally different.
Yeah. That's why like I mentioned before, like I don't think it's that beneficial to like, okay, I want to rephrase this. It is super beneficial to pay attention to what the top level coaches are doing, like, and the information that they put out, like Mass, Monthly Application of Strength Sport, I think, by Eric Helms, Greg Nichols, and all those other guys. That's an amazing, like, it's an amazing source of information, along with a lot of other stuff that you see from like Jeff Nippard, Mike Zordos, Isertel, all of that. You should pay attention to that, but don't be afraid from just like massively straying from it and trying something. Like I think like I was very scared like a few years ago to do anything different from them, because I mean, I just thought this is the absolute gold standard. This is what I have to be doing if I want to move forward. But at a certain point, I was just like, I saw certain things working that most people would think that's not going to work or that's not going to be beneficial. I was just like, all right, let's just mess around. Like, let's just see what we can get away with, what we can work with, what actually might even feel better. Like we had Isertel on the podcast, and you know, we were talking about like fasting and training, etc. And I still wasn't convinced that I need to eat something before I do jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Not because like of how I perform. It's I can't explain it. It's just like you have to actually do it.
Yeah, that was a great episode. And I completely agree. All of those researchers you mentioned, I have immense respect for, and definitely listen to what they have to say. But you're right. You have to adapt it to the individual and your lifestyle, and take it with a grain of salt. And one thing you did recently in Nsima, which I really liked, was your fat loss autopilot series on Instagram. And you had an email campaign about it, and a Facebook group, I believe. And it was all centered on habits, which I think is so cool. Can you talk about why you focus on like simple habits and life changes people can make? And maybe if you can share a couple of them for the audience so they can have something they can take away, something that could affect their life and improve the way that like they think about fat loss and not just losing fat, but keeping it off longer term.
Oh, for sure, man. So the main reason I did that, and I tried to focus on habits instead of the everything else, is because when it comes to your long-term progress, you've seen a lot of people start diets, 12-week diets, 16, whatever, and they lose a lot of weight, especially when they're working with somebody. They lose that weight, but once they stop working with that individual, you see them 6 months later, they gain the weight back, or they gain more back. And the main reason is because they don't have the necessary daily habits and processes set in line to allow them to continue making the progress on their own, or to allow them to maintain the progress that they started with, right? So that's the main reason I did that, just because, you know, I could tell you what numbers you need to eat, or I could give you a meal plan and you could do that and you can make progress, but it's not going to be a long-term thing. And then one other thing that I just, you know, we've been talking a lot about this on the Power Project, is people need to fall in love or make a habit of the actual process of what they're doing. So if you're just getting into training in the gym, or you're just getting into any of this stuff, and you have a big goal, well, that goal may be a year away or 2 years away. So what's going to keep you going that whole time? It's going to be the process, the day-to-day process of the things that you need to do to get there. Okay, so exercising, taking walks, not having certain foods in your house that are going to make you binge, etc. You need those processes in line to get there, because it's going to be more so of a life journey rather than a 12-week journey. Get what I'm saying? So that's why I made that, because I noticed that, you know, a lot of people just don't have those habits set. Like, you know, if you're trying to diet, even if you have kids or you have family, you probably shouldn't have highly processed foods that you're going to end up binging on anyway in the house. You know, even myself at this point, one of the reasons, you know, in the past, one of my big struggles was binging on just bad food. And well, why did I binge on it? It was in the cabinet or it was in the fridge. And how did I solve that problem? By getting it out of the house and making sure that if I really wanted to get it, I had to work for it. I had to go to the store. I had to buy it. I had to do all of that thinking and playing around in my head to bring it back home and then eat it. And I I won't end up doing that anyway. Right? So that's one of those big things that I had people start with. I had them raid their fridges and I had them raid their pantries for just trashy processed foods that they end up overeating anyway. Right? And then after that, I think, what was the next step in that whole autopilot series? Let me think real quick. I haven't looked at it a bit. But, oh, yeah,
The
yeah.
water, the fasting.
Yeah. So fasting, I think, is one of those habits too that's beneficial, and it's not something that everybody needs to do, but it's a very simple thing because, like, it to me at this point, I don't see the merit of eating all day. Like a lot of people talk about fasting, like, oh my gosh, you can't not eat for that long. That's dangerous. It'll affect your hormone. It's like, no, not eating for 12 hours isn't going to kill you. It's not going to affect you negatively. It's not that big of a deal, right? But if you can get yourself used to not eating all day long, because what happens when you eat your first meal is ghrelin starts producing, you start feeling hungrier throughout the day, and it's much harder to adhere to what you actually need to do unless you're tracking very consistently. It allows you not to, have to eat all day long. So I think fasting is one of those habits that if you can just get used to that each day, dieting in the long run or dropping body fat in the long run is going to be a very easy thing to do. So both Mark and I have noticed, not just for ourselves, but a lot of people that come through here, when they build that habit after a point in time, because being a deficit is so easy, the weight just strips right off. And then obviously there's another one. I think this is just a big one for most people. Prioritizing protein, because it's the most satiating macronutrient. When you're trying to diet, what's one of the hardest things that people find on a diet? Being full, not overeating. So what's going to be the thing that's going to allow you to be full? Prioritizing protein. Mark uses protein leveraging. There's another guy that we had on the podcast recently. What was his name?
Dr. Ted Naiman.
Ted Naiman, thank you. Yeah, you probably, I don't know if you've had him on, but you probably have had him on if you haven't.
I've tried. He's a hard man to track down. He's very busy.
He's a great guest. But yeah, it's such a simple concept of just maybe having protein as one of your first parts of your meal, your biggest part of your meal. You're going to get full pretty fast. Again, another very easy way of maintaining a deficit. And what do many people have the bad habit of? Eating an insane amount of really, really palatable, high caloric carbohydrates that push them into a surplus. So if you just switch that around and you have more protein, makes dieting super easy. So yeah, there's a lot more as far as exercise is concerned, et cetera. But like, I just wanted to try to boil things down into just the simple concepts that if you just do these things, you'll probably be heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think if 99% of people in the US adopted those like 6 habits you outline, they'd be super healthy and we wouldn't have any of the problems we have, or at least most of the problems we have with an obese population. And one of the things you talked about in that series was sleep. And you have a Whoop band, right? You track your sleep through that. So I was curious, some people find, and I don't know if you've noticed this with yourself or others, do giant meals at night, especially high protein and fat meals, hurt your deep sleep at all? Or have you fiddled with this? How long before bed do you need to finish eating to get a good night's sleep?
Yeah, so my deep sleep always averages around an hour and 40 to 2 hours and 10 minutes. And it's never really, unless I had some alcohol or something that night, right? Which I already know is not good for my sleep. That's when my deep sleep will go down to an hour or an hour and 10 minutes. Oddly enough, it's the nights, because when I do have carbohydrates, it's usually at night before I go to bed for the next day. When I do have more carbohydrates, I do tend that I have a little bit better of a sleep score. And that's pretty consistent for me. And when I say a little bit of carbohydrates, I mean 100 grams, 100, 120 grams or something like that. That's one of the biggest things that's made a difference for me in terms of actually having a positive impact on my sleep. But higher protein, higher fat, I'm not sure. I mean, generally I eat high protein every day, so I wouldn't be able to tell if, I had low protein, if it made a difference. I'm assuming it might, but I haven't done any of that. The only thing I've noticed is that when I do eat more carbs before bed, first off, I fall asleep super fast because it makes me tired as hell.
Yeah, it knocks you out.
Sleep. Yeah, I do end up having deeper sleep. The Whoop band itself has been pretty awesome just because I'm able to use it during Jiu-Jitsu. It's fairly inexpensive. It doesn't require many charges. It's a pretty decent product. But yeah, it's great for tracking your sleep.
That's cool. Yeah, I've noticed, and some other people have noticed, which makes fasting a little bit more difficult, is that if I have a big meal of like meat within 2 hours of bed, my deep sleep is just trash because I'm still digesting the meat as I sleep. So I have to make sure that I pull my fasting window a little bit forward. But it varies for the individual. I think some people can eat a ton of food and just conk out.
Do you focus, let's use that as an example. Do you pull the protein back closer to sleep, and do you still eat like some fatty foods before bed, or do you just pull all the food back close to before you go to sleep?
Yeah, so I pull all the food back. So I will end my eating window like 3 hours before bed, and I'll also make my meals throughout the day sequentially smaller. And that has made my sleep better and better. I wish it weren't the case, because I love the idea of just like fasting through the morning and then having like a small meal and then a big meal to end the night. I think that's the most fun and probably the most socially flexible. And it's what I used to do. But when I flipped it and maintained the fasting window, but just had it earlier and had the smallest meal last, it helped my sleep a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think maybe one of the only reasons why it might not affect my sleep much is just because of my expenditure during the day, as far as exercise is concerned, because once nighttime comes, I'm so dead that
you touch the pillow and pass out.
It could mess up my sleep at that point, really. So
yeah, good for you. And so I'd love to get a little bit deeper into your diet, Nsima, like staple foods you eat every day. I know it's a lot of meat, but like if you can tell us approximately how much meat you're eating, if you're getting protein from protein shakes as well. And then we can go into like carb sources, fiber, fruits and vegetables, things like that.
Mm-hmm. So protein, I do have protein shakes at home, but like I'll probably use it maybe once or twice a week. And it's not because I'm thinking about using it once or twice a week. It's just it's just really easy for me to get all my protein from meat. So I eat a lot of red meat, ground beef, different types of steaks, etc. I don't know the last time I ate chicken, to be honest. Yeah, I don't know the last time I ate chicken. There's nothing wrong with chicken. I just like, I just don't eat it much. I do have fish every now and then. So I'll have fish maybe once or twice a week, typically salmon. I know there's a lot of debate against like wild caught versus other. I think I get wild caught salmon from Costco. So I don't really delve too much into that or care too much about it, even though it's something that a lot of people do. So if you do, check out Thomas DeLauer, because he has a lot of information on that.
Yeah.
He does. So protein sources. Yeah, I do have liver still. Usually every 2 days, I'll have raw liver. I've had liver since I was a kid, to be honest. So like the taste doesn't throw me off that much. But I still eat that. And any other protein sources?
Do you eat a lot of eggs?
Oh, yeah. I eat a lot of eggs. I eat eggs almost every single day. Yeah. Sometimes I'll have some bacon. Sometimes, yeah. So it's very simple as far as the protein is concerned. I'm really trying to think if there's any other protein I really add in there. Dairy, I'll have dairy sometimes, but it's not very often as far as cheese or milk is concerned. But yeah,
and you're about 240 pounds. Would you say you're having like 2 pounds of meat a day, or a pound and a half, and a half dozen eggs? Do you know roughly?
Around 220 to 250 grams of protein a day. Sometimes around 200, but that's kind of rare.
Got it. So maybe a pound and a half of meat and then a bunch of eggs.
Yeah.
And are you having, you mentioned the liver, are you having other organs, bone marrow,
No.
bone broth, anything like that?
I do have bone broth every now and then, because I have it in my fridge, but it's not an everyday thing. Sometimes I'll use bone broth to break my fast. But again, it's not every single day. I do have pork belly too, because I do like that. So
nice.
There's that. But yeah, no, as far as organ meats are concerned, I just kind of stick to liver. I've been okay doing that so far.
Got it.
And more exotic stuff.
Yeah, I really like the raw liver too. I have like 4 ounces 3 times a week, probably. Get it from a local butcher, and it just, I feel great after I eat it. I feel like energized. It's really good. And I know your carbs are low, but what are your main sources? Are you having like a piece or two of fruit? Are you having a little bit of vegetables? You've mentioned rice and potatoes in the past. What are your main sources, and what would you say is like roughly the amount you shoot for per day, or how you think about it?
It's mainly rice and potatoes. It'll be sometimes I'll have like pasta or whatever if I want to have a little bit of fun, but it's kind of rare that happens. I shoot for at max usually 150. Some days I'll have fun days with my lady and we'll like go out and eat something and I won't even pay attention to what I eat.
Yeah.
I'll eat a good amount, but it won't ever get anywhere like in the 500s or 400s or whatever. But you know, that happens every now and then. That's like when we eat out. But pretty much, yeah, it's potatoes, rice, sometimes pasta. And I have fruit. So I don't eat fruit every single day, just sometimes when I feel like it. Like that's kind of what I'm liking with what I've been doing so far, because in the past I was extremely regimented. Now I have conceptually an idea of I'm going to have around 230 grams of protein, maybe. If I feel like I need some carbohydrates, because if I feel a little bit run down, I'll have some carbs, might be some fruit, might be some rice, might add pasta to my food or whatever. And it's like, it's very, very flowy at this point, which is where I think that's the goal of where I want my diet to be. I don't want to have to, let's say, don't get me wrong, I do like structure, but I don't, at this point, it's more so, I know habitually what I can eat. That's going to get me what I need to, like, going to get me the results I'm looking for. Yeah. I don't have to have this at this time, this at this time. I need to have this much of this every single day. Pretty much eat what I feel like I need to eat. And it just ends up, since I've been able to build good eating habits, it works. It works well. You know,
it's more intuitive.
Exactly.
And how about like vegetables or fiber? Do you use a lot of that, or do you think it helps with fullness, or do you just mostly stay away from it and get like trace amount of fiber from the little amount of rice or potatoes you're eating?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I do have certain clients of mine that like really like eating vegetables and using that. I'll have them have a fiber goal during the day. I don't. Like if and it's not like I'm even avoiding vegetables. I just personally don't. Like my girl buys it, I don't buy it. You know, sometimes if she has it, I'll eat it. I'm not anti-vegetable by any means, you know. Yeah. So for people that like, because I know a lot of individuals that are carnivore are anti-vegetable. I'm not anti-vegetable.
Yeah, me either. Vegetables. They're good for flavoring.
Yeah, exactly. I just, at this point, I literally have had no need. It won't really add much to my life right now. So, I mean, again, maybe I'll have some if it's like in a meal that I eat outside, or if my lady makes something. But personally, yeah, it's not something. Fiber isn't even something I pay attention to anymore. I used to. In the past, when I was very like, and when you asked that question, actually, in terms of fullness, of course, a good amount of fiber is going to help you feel fuller. I'd much rather just eat more protein for that, you know, effect. But I mean, if you add, you know, say Brussels sprouts or broccoli or whatever, asparagus, whatever, any vegetable you want to add to your meal, it will help you feel fuller. It will add volume to your food. But again, for me personally, I just don't have a need for it.
Yeah, makes sense. And just thinking, rounding it out, we talked about protein, talked about carbs. If you're eating like 250-ish grams of protein, that's maybe 1,000 calories, and up to 150 grams of carbs on a high day, that's like 600 calories. You're a big dude. You're doing a lot of activity. So there's a lot of calories missing from that. Do you add fats to your food, like avocados, heavy cream, butter? Or are you mostly just getting it through the protein sources, through the eggs, through the steaks? Because that seems like a really big deficit.
Yeah, no, I totally forgot about avocado. I do have avocado every few days. I do like that, but I add a lot of butter to my foods. Heavy cream I do have. So when I have protein shakes, I'll add heavy cream. My cuts of meat are generally pretty fatty outside of the P&T stuff because it's pretty lean. So like when I do have pork belly, I do add a lot of butter to my food. Eggs, sometimes I'll have bacon. There's a lot of fat in line in what I eat daily. So the fats can be on an upwards of 100 and whatever, maybe 120 or higher, depending on the day. So yeah, there's a lot of fat added in there.
Yeah,
and
it makes sense.
The cool thing about this eating without tracking that I've learned is like, you really, really become in tune with how much you need to eat to feel better, and especially how much you need to eat to perform. Like at the end of the night, I can be like, ooh, it'd be a good idea if I had some extra carbs tonight for tomorrow. Or I need to eat a lot of food tonight. Or on a certain night, I'll be like, not really feeling much today. I don't feel like I need to eat that much today. Like you really start to get in tune with how much you need to eat to do what you're trying to do. So that's something that I didn't used to have before, because it was always, okay, eat these amount of calories each day, eat this amount of protein, carbs, and fats each day. And even on days that I would feel super full, I would just still eat what I had programmed for myself to eat. Right now, it's not like that. And it's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think one of the problems with tracking macros, especially, is that people try to hit the same numbers every single day. And your body doesn't work like that. Like sometimes your body needs more food, not necessarily because you expended more energy, but just because it's like, hey, I'm building muscle right now. And if you give me food, it's going to go straight into muscle. And other days it's like, hey, you worked out really hard today, but actually I'm good. Like I'm maybe mobilizing some body fat, or the food you gave me is super nutritious, and like we can stop a few hundred calories short. And like that just never happens when you're tracking calories, because you're like, hey, I have these numbers, I have this left, I need to get to the number. So that's something I really like about intuitive eating. And it seems like there's a pattern evolving here, but I feel like I have to ask, how often do you fast, and for how long? Like how many days per week, and what's the typical? I know you're not like setting a stopwatch, obviously, and it sounds like you're going a little bit by how you feel, but how many days would you say you fast a week, and for how long?
Yeah, typically it's every day, unless it's like literally like there'll be one day during a week, or sometimes it's been every day for multiple weeks. Or some weeks it ends up being like 5 days out of the week. It's a minimum 5 days each week. And on the days that I don't feel like fasting, it usually doesn't come down to me feeling super hungry, but it's just like, we want to go out and get a nice breakfast somewhere that we haven't been before. So we're just not going to fast, So, but typically it's every day. Minimum, I'll usually end up fasting for 16 hours. So it's usually a 16-hour minimum, even though I don't have the clock going. I just end up eating around that point. Sometimes it's 20. Sometimes I have random days, and it usually happens every few weeks, where I'm just like, I just don't feel like eating. So I just won't eat. Like it literally will just be like that day. I don't feel it. And then the next day I'll just, and it's usually it's not super intentional. Like I don't have that plan. It's just, it randomly happens every now and then. And I wonder what that is or why that happens, but I just let it happen. It doesn't bother me. And I do know that those types of fasts are good for me anyway. At certain times, it usually might happen every quarter. I will purposefully maybe do a 72. But outside of that, it's usually a 16 to 20 hour each day.
Got it. And one question I forgot to ask about the carbs is, do you use any honey? I know that's something a lot of folks like to incorporate as like a low fiber, low like anti-nutrient, quote unquote, whatever that means, food source.
I have it in the house. I used to use it quite a bit. I don't use it much anymore. I can't remember the last time I really touched it, but it's nothing I'm against. It's nothing that I think is negative if somebody does use it. I just personally haven't had a need or want to use any honey recently. Yeah.
And I think we made this clear earlier, and you've talked about it on the podcast a million times, but just to make it super transparent for folks, you have some really hard, intense, competitive, long training sessions with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. How do you eat around training?
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I know it's awesome. So when I say that, let's put an asterisk next to that, guys. Like it took me a while to feel comfortable doing that, because I always, especially from my background as far as athletics, I always thought that I was leaving something on the table. But then when I kind of, tested myself, I'd have some carbs before I trained, and then I'd train, and then I'd fast and then I'd train. I was just like, I didn't notice a big difference. The big thing that makes the biggest difference for me is electrolytes. If I'm deficient, I will cramp up. I won't feel good. I won't have great energy. And also, if I didn't eat the amount of food I needed to eat the night before to fuel my performance for the next day, I'm going to feel it. But that's the thing that I've like kind of realized, and this for myself and even for clients that I work with. There's this thing that you should eat this amount a few hours before you work out, etc. I think there's some benefit to it. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary to be able to perform at a high level that you have to eat right before you work out. I don't think that anymore. And if you want to do that, go ahead, but toy around with, like, if you're a jiu-jitsu athlete or whatever, toy around with eating a lot of food the night before and then training the next day. Make sure you're not electrolyte deficient. I like to use Element. We use Element here. They have a really good electrolyte supplement. I'll typically use that before I train, and I feel damn good. I've done tournaments fasted. I don't suggest that. That was just a test for myself to see if I'd actually be able to perform. I don't think you should do a jiu-jitsu tournament fasted, okay? But I did, and I won, but I also didn't feel like crap when I did it, you know? So yeah, the one thing that someone might say, oh, that's kind of woo-woo or whatever, but I do have a much clearer head when I train fasted jiu-jitsu or lifting. My head's just much clearer, much more focused. I just get into that, especially with jiu-jitsu, I just get into that zone much easier. And there's also, like we've talked about, there's also the whole nasal breathing thing that's made a very big difference for me as far as athletic performance. But that's a lot to dig into. But yeah, I train jiu-jitsu fasted.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think as one of, if not like the most glycolytic sport you can imagine outside of like maybe wind sprints and soccer, there's not something where you could quote unquote need carbs more than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I think it's a testament. And do you think you're going by your body's signals, you're intuitively eating? Do you think you're hitting like roughly maintenance or a deficit or a surplus with the way you're eating? Just curious.
So if we're going around where my body weight's been, I think in general, I'm around maintenance. There are times where I will start to dip. Like I'll see myself get a lot leaner. I'll start to feel a little bit weaker. I'm like, okay, let's start purposefully eating more. So then I'll literally just eat more than I feel that I need to eat. And in that time I'm in a surplus, and I'll start to gain that weight back slowly. And I like that can happen. Like if I start to see myself, if I know I've been irresponsible for about 3 weeks and I know it, I've been doing it knowing I've been a little bit irresponsible with my food, and I see myself gaining a little bit of body fat, I'm like, okay, let's cut it back a little bit. Let's cut back this, and boom, right back where I need to be in about a week or two. So I'm really like, that's where I think that's the goal to the place you want to get. Okay. Whatever body you have, you want to, if you're happy with that, you want to be able to maintain it. Okay. If you see yourself losing, or if you want to drop body fat, you can drop a little bit without having to track super hard. If you want to gain, you can eat more without having to track too hard. I do think that's the goal, and that's where I am now. And I'm very happy that I have all the tracking experience to be able to do this without stressing about it. Because it's like, I never, ever, ever feel like I'm dieting.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's good to have it just be habits, going back to the earlier point. And I think one thing that I think you and Mark and Andrew have done an awesome job talking about is not making carnivore dogmatic, talking about being meat-based and meat-forward. And I think for 99% of people, that is like all you need. And I think, if you have some rice here and there and a little bit of fruit and some heavy cream, whatever it is, if the majority of your diet is meat and animal products, like that's carnivore, and that's awesome. But for the people who have autoimmune issues or certain reasons, like digestive issues, that they absolutely have to be 100% strict, then they need to be. But I'm just curious for you, have you ever tried like a pure, strict 100% carnivore diet, or do you have any interest in it?
Yeah, no, there have been days, and like there have been days and weeks where I just ate only meat just to see how I'd feel. It felt fine. Like it wasn't super difficult. It wasn't anything too crazy, but at the same time, I was just like, well, do I want to eat some rice? Yeah. All right, bro, let's go eat some rice. Like that's where I think outside of all the situation you mentioned, autoimmune issues, there's certain reasons why you just literally can't eat certain foods. I don't see the reason for purposefully, cutting out certain foods from your diet. And I think I think everyone that listens to your podcast, Steph, who listens to Paul Saladino, I think he's done a great job, because I think in the past he was super like, yeah, you don't eat this, like just don't eat these foods. But he's come, he's become a little bit more even with that, and I really appreciate that. I just like I've never been one to, like people that are vegan, they demonize meats, etc. Blah blah. Carnivores, it's like it's two sides. I think that if you want to, you can be somewhere in between that, still ranging towards the meat side, but you can have a lot of different foods and still get to your goals and still feel happy. That's just me though. So
yeah, I totally agree. I think folks don't have to be super dogmatic or strict or in-group, out-group about it. It's, whatever makes you feel good and helps you perform and look good at the end of the day. Shifting topics a little bit away from nutrition, we chatted a little bit before we started recording about your Smooth Panther channel and yoga. And I mentioned, and we'll just say again for folks here, everyone should check out those videos. I've replaced 20 minutes of Netflix with my wife at night with 20 minutes of Smooth Panther every night. And not only has it made us both feel better and looser throughout the day, and it's really relaxing, but it's also just been a great bonding experience for us. So really encourage people to check those out. But what got you into yoga and inspired you to start those videos?
Well, so doing jiu-jitsu, I kind of realized that I needed to build more mobility and more flexibility. Like as far as lifting is concerned, I did a lot of mobility work, but I didn't stretch that much. And I noticed that I was just feeling really tight, and I didn't like that. So I started doing more mobility yoga type work every single day. And I just noticed that I was feeling really, 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 really good. And I wasn't walking around having pain in my lower back or just having pain in general. I just felt great. So, I'd always tell my clients certain mobility movements to do, certain stretches to do. But I figured, okay, if I can just make a few videos that I can just give them, then I can just like set it and forget it. I can just say, hey, do these videos. All our flexibility and mobility stuff dealt with. And yeah, that I mainly made it initially for my clients, but people really liked it. So then I just started making more on my YouTube channel. I do have a lot of like lifting information on that channel too. I'll be putting more lifting there too. But right now, like there's just, I think right now there's 23 Smooth Panther videos, and I have more in the tank currently. And yeah, that was the main thing. Initially, it started for my clients to do, but then since it was on YouTube, people just started hopping on it, and people like it. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And yeah, like I said, it's just made me feel much looser and better while I sleep, when I wake up in the morning, while I'm working out. So really appreciate that. And it's very calm, like chill yoga. It's not like when people are like, I'm going to go do a 60-minute yoga session where it's like a workout and you feel gassed and you're sweating. It's like relaxing. You have the nice calming voice, the music. So I appreciate that. Cool. So Nsima, what are you looking forward to in the future? What are some things you're working towards athletically, professionally, personally, whatever you want to share with the audience?
Yeah. So, I mean, 2020 has been a trip, yo.
Yeah.
But I'm lucky enough to be able to have our jiu-jitsu school here is back open, and they're not planning on closing. So obviously doing more in that, I've talked to Mark. We have goals of getting towards that black belt and kind of competing at Worlds each year, medaling at Worlds, and ideally getting there at the top level. As far as jiu-jitsu is concerned, training here in the gym, just maintaining strength, working with more people. That's fun. We have a lot of big goals for the podcast, which is great. The podcast has been something because I think this is now year 2 that I've been with them or doing the podcast with them. And I think it's one of the most fun things that I've ever done as far as fitness. Actually, it is the funnest thing I've ever done as far as fitness is concerned. And the main reason is because we're able to have so many awesome guests that we learn a lot from, that teach us a lot, that lead us towards new resources, and kind of put us on stuff before other people are really able to before it really reaches, I guess, mainstream fitness. We're already paying attention to it and we're already implementing it. So that's what has me just super juiced. All the cool, smart people we have on and learning from them, I don't know. I think the biggest thing that I'm excited for is like just continuing to learn new things. Yeah, I get to like work with people and coach people, and that's awesome. And I'm happy to get to grow that. But the learning process, man, I just think That's the most exciting aspect of all of it. That is because like once you can learn something and then you can implement it, you can see the changes and then you can implement it with others and then you see the changes for them. It's dope. Right. So I'm just a constant student at this point, and that's what I'm looking forward to right now.
Yeah, that's a really cool and great philosophy to have, especially as guys in our 20s. I feel like just focusing on learning, bettering yourself, you can never go wrong with that, and surrounding yourself with people that you can learn from and support you. So where can people find you? This has been awesome, Nsima. I think folks will get a lot out of this podcast, a little bit of a different perspective from high-level athlete and coach. So really appreciate you coming on. But where can folks find out more about you? And I'll have links to everything in the show notes.
Yeah. So for coaching, you can go to breakthebar.com. As far as the podcast, there's Mark Bell's Power Project, which is obviously right here. We're here in studio with Andrew Zaragoza, Mark, and myself. On Instagram, I'm at Nsima Inyang. On YouTube, I'm at Nsima Inyang. On Twitter, I'm at Nsima Inyang. Yeah. And then
I'll find it.
Yeah. I co-host another podcast with my homie from we've been friends since 6 years old. We just talk about random stuff, kind of self-development type stuff, but also things that are going on socially. That's called We Don't Know Yet, but it's WDK Yet on Instagram. And if you type it in on Apple, it's We Don't Know Yet. So that's really fun. It's really fun to talk with him. So we have some different perspectives there. And I think that's it. I mentioned Mark Bell's Power Project, right?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
You're good.
Yeah, you can find us here. But yeah, that's all the places you can find me. And yeah, check out Smooth Panther if you guys haven't. It's I like doing it before bed because I sleep well. And more videos are coming there. So hope you guys enjoy it.
Thanks, Nsima. This has been great.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate you having me on, man.
Of course. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered, or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Carnivore Cast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.